The stars twinkled quietly in the vastness of space, far away from the bustling life of Earth. On a distant planet, a thriving colony of humans had built a peaceful world. The air was crisp, the sky always bright, and the people lived in harmony. It had been years since they first settled on this new world, and now they called it home. Children played in the streets, farmers tended to their crops, and the markets were full of life. Everything seemed perfect, untouched by the chaos of the universe. But that peace was about to be shattered. Out of nowhere, the sky darkened. The people looked up in confusion as strange ships appeared above the colony. These weren't ships from any known civilization. Their dark, metallic surfaces reflected the stars in a way that made them seem unnatural. The colony's defense systems, always vigilant, quickly sprang into action. Alarms blared across the city, and military personnel rushed to their stations. But it was too late. The enemy had arrived, and they came in overwhelming numbers. The ships in the sky began to fire. At first, it was just a few shots, distant and quiet. But within moments, the sky erupted with blasts of energy. Buildings shook. The ground trembled. People screamed as the very air around them turned to fire. The first wave of attacks tore through the colony's outer defenses, causing explosions that echoed through the streets. The colony's military scrambled to react, launching fighters into the air and firing back at the incoming ships. But the enemy's technology was far superior. The humans had no chance. From the ground, the defenders could see the enemy ships circling above like vultures. Each ship was massive, a sleek and deadly force unlike anything the humans had ever encountered. Their weapons were precise, tearing apart buildings and reducing them to rubble with a single shot. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid smell of burning metal. Fire raged across the city as explosions lit up the night sky. In the heart of the colony, the Council of Leaders watched in horror as the city they had built for decades was being destroyed. Desperation filled the room as they realized they were powerless to stop the attack. "We need to call for help," one of the council members said, his voice shaking. But there was no time. Their communication systems were being jammed by the enemy, and the rest of the fleet was too far away to reach them in time. As the city crumbled, a small group of survivors managed to reach an underground bunker, a safe place they had built in case of emergency. Among them was the colony's commander, Captain Maradrell. She had seen war before, but nothing like this. As the building above them collapsed, she knew that their only hope was to survive long enough to send a signal to Earth. It was a slim chance, but it was all they had. The underground bunker was silent except for the frantic tapping of fingers on keyboards. The survivors worked quickly, their hands shaking as they tried to send a distress signal to Earth. Captain Drell looked at the screen, her heart racing. The message was simple. "The colony is falling. We need help. Please, Earth, we need you." It took what felt like forever, but the message finally went through. The screen flickered as the transmission sent, and for a moment, Captain Drell allowed herself a brief sigh of relief. They had done it. The message would reach Earth. They weren't completely alone. But as she looked back at the destruction unfolding on the surface above, she knew it was too late for most of the colony. The invaders had won. Above ground, the enemy ships were still attacking, showing no mercy. The ground shook with the force of their relentless bombardment. The colony was no more. The bright, peaceful world that had once stood as a symbol of hope for humanity was now a graveyard, reduced to ash and rubble. The invaders, cold and calculating, didn't stop after the colony's destruction. They knew they had won, and they knew what came next. The remaining survivors were scattered across the planet, hiding in the shadows, their only hope now lying with Earth. The invaders moved on, their mission complete, leaving nothing behind but destruction and silence. Captain Drell stood in the bunker, her face grim. She knew that this was only the beginning. The enemy hadn't come just to destroy their colony. They had come to send a message to humanity. Earth was next. But the question was, Would Earth respond? Would they come to their aid? Or would humanity stand by and watch as their colonies fell one by one? The last thing Captain Drell saw before the lights flickered out was the image of the enemy ships, disappearing into the blackness of space. Their mission was far from over. The war had just begun. The screen went black. The destruction of the colony echoed through the stars, a chilling reminder of the brutal power the enemy possessed. Back on Earth, the world watched in shock as the news of the attack spread like wildfire. Governments, leaders, and citizens alike were left speechless. Humanity had always been confident, safe in the belief that they were the dominant species in the galaxy. But now, that illusion had been shattered in an instant. In a high-security command center deep beneath Earth's surface, the leaders of the planet convened. The walls were lined with massive screens, each showing reports from the devastated colony, satellite images, and emergency transmissions. The room was filled with tense voices, all speaking over each other, trying to make sense of the disaster. On one of the screens, the message from Captain Drell appeared again. The colony is falling. We need help. Please, Earth, we need you. The words were like a slap to the face. We can't just sit here and do nothing, President Evelyn Carter said, her voice cutting through the chaos. She stood at the head of the room, her face pale but determined. This is a call for help. We cannot ignore it. We need to retaliate. General Alvarez, the leader of Earth's military forces, said bluntly. We've faced attacks before, but nothing like this. These invaders, we don't know what they're capable of. Our fleets are not prepared for this kind of threat. There's more at stake here than just this colony, the vice president added, his voice low. If we don't respond, we risk showing weakness to the galaxy. Every other colony out there will fall too. We need to show them that humanity is not a species to be underestimated. There was a moment of silence as everyone in the room absorbed the gravity of the situation. If they didn't act, if they didn't fight back, they would be sending a message to every alien race in the universe that humanity was weak, fragile, and ripe for destruction. President Carter took a deep breath, looking around the room. Then it settled. We prepare for war. A wave of tension swept over the room. The decision had been made, but the task ahead was monumental. Earth had a powerful military, but it was not invincible. The loss of the colony was a sobering reminder that their enemies were unlike any they had faced before. Yet, the drive for survival, the need to protect their people, burned fiercely within each of them. The camera zoomed in on President Carter's face as she made her next decision. We'll launch Operation Vengeance. I want every resource we have dedicated to building a fleet capable of confronting these invaders. We'll send a message, loud and clear, that humanity will not bow to anyone. Immediately, plans began to unfold. The spaceports, once peaceful and quiet, were now bustling with activity. Massive warships were under construction in record time, their engines humming as they were fitted with the most advanced weapons humanity could muster. Military officers scrambled to coordinate, and engineers worked around the clock, forging new technologies that could stand up to the alien fleet. Across the globe, soldiers trained relentlessly. They knew what was at stake. It was no longer about a single colony. It was about the future of humanity. The people of Earth understood that they couldn't afford to fail. Every man, woman, and child was now part of a greater cause. Every warship that was built was a step closer to Earth's survival, and they would not rest until the fleet was ready. But as the ships were being prepared, the question on everyone's mind was clear. Would they be ready in time? The invaders had already shown their strength, and the clock was ticking. Captain Drell's desperate plea echoed in the minds of everyone in the military, the government, and every citizen who watched the news. Would Earth respond quickly enough to make a difference? In the military command center, General Alvarez stood before a massive map of the galaxy. His fingers hovered over the holographic display as he calculated the distance between Earth and the colony. The enemy fleet was vast, and they had already begun to scatter across the galaxy, leaving nothing but destruction in their wake. Earth's forces had to move quickly. Once we launch the fleet, we'll need to go on the offensive, Alvarez said, his voice steady, yet tinged with concern. We can't wait for them to reach Earth. We strike first, or we may never get another chance. President Carter nodded gravely. Then we will strike. The decision was made. A massive fleet, over 700,000 warships strong, would be launched from Earth's orbit to confront the alien threat head-on. Every corner of the planet was now mobilized, from the soldiers to the engineers to the civilians. Humanity's fate rested on this single moment, this one chance to prove they were more than just a target in the vastness of space. As the days passed, the fleet took shape. The sheer scale of it was overwhelming. The warships were colossal, each one capable of withstanding the most powerful weapons known to humanity. Their designs were sleek and deadly, built not just for defense, but for offensive power. They were humanity's vengeance incarnate. Meanwhile, the enemy fleet watched from afar. They had seen the human response, but they didn't understand it. They were confident that they had already broken humanity's spirit. But what they failed to realize was that Earth was not a broken species. It was a species that had just been awakened. And now, it would be their turn to feel the wrath of humanity's fury. As the last of the warships prepared for launch, a sense of determination swept across Earth. The countdown had begun. Soon, humanity would show the universe what it meant to stand against an unstoppable force. The enemy may have destroyed one colony, but they had awakened a giant. And the giant was ready to fight. The moment the fleet launched, the skies above Earth exploded with brilliant light as 700,000 warships, each brimming with the most advanced weaponry humanity had ever designed, ascended into the void. The entire planet seemed to hold its breath as the vessels soared into space, their engines roaring as they broke through the atmosphere. The world watched in silence, knowing this was no ordinary mission. It was humanity's last chance to show the galaxy that Earth would not go down without a fight. Admiral Samuel Cross, the commanding officer of the fleet, stood at the helm of the largest warship, the Vanguard. His face was set with grim determination as he surveyed the vast expanse of the fleet. He had led many missions in his career, but this was different. This time, it wasn't just a battle for victory. It was a battle for survival. The entire future of humanity depended on what happened next. We're not just defending our colonies, Admiral Cross said, his voice calm but firm as he addressed his officers over the intercom. We're sending a message to them, to the galaxy. Humanity is a force to be reckoned with. As the fleet moved through the stars, it was impossible to ignore the sheer scale of it. The ships were designed to be both imposing and highly efficient, sleek, fast, and heavily armed. Some of them were equipped with advanced plasma cannons that could vaporize entire enemy ships with a single shot. Others were armed with devastating EMP missiles designed to disable enemy systems. They were ready for whatever the enemy could throw at them. But the enemy they were up against was unlike any foe they had faced before. The alien forces that had destroyed the colony were not only technologically advanced, but incredibly efficient. They struck without warning, leaving destruction in their wake. No one knew how many ships the enemy had or what strategies they employed. All humanity had was hope and a massive fleet ready for war. As the Vanguard and its fleet entered deep space, the atmosphere grew tense. The darkness of the universe was overwhelming, but it was nothing compared to the uncertainty that hung in the air. Earth's forces were heading toward the heart of enemy territory, but they had no idea where the invaders were waiting or how much power they had hidden in reserve. Every officer on every ship was prepared for the worst, knowing that one wrong move could mean their end. Days passed as the fleet traveled, pushing forward at full speed toward their destination. Each warship maintained a perfect formation, its systems constantly monitoring for signs of danger. The tension in the fleet was palpable. Some of the crew members spoke in hushed tones, others focused solely on their duties, but all shared the same thought. What if we don't make it? And then on the sixth day, the first sign of the enemy appeared. A flash of light, a distant explosion, caught the attention of the fleet. It was far off in the distance, but it was unmistakable. The enemy was close. "Report," Admiral Cross demanded, his eyes fixed on the display in front of him. The sensors had picked up a large group of enemy ships entering the system. "Multiple signatures detected. Sir, it's them." "The enemy fleet," the sensor officer replied, his voice tight with urgency. "It's massive. We're talking thousands of ships, possibly more." Admiral Cross's heart skipped a beat. The reports had been true. This was no small force. The enemy had not only taken out one colony, but they had now positioned their fleet for a full-scale invasion. Their arrival was timed perfectly to cut off any retreat for the human forces. "Prepare the fleet for battle. Target all enemy ships and fire at will," Cross ordered, his voice steady but full of authority. The moment had arrived. There was no turning back. The fleet moved into position, its warships forming a defensive perimeter around the vanguard. The enemy ships were now in view, their massive forms blocking out the stars as they advanced. They were just as the reports had described, sleek, dark, and terrifying. The sight of them made the blood of every human soldier run cold, but there was no time for fear. The battle was about to begin. As the distance between the two fleets closed, a brief moment of eerie silence hung in the air. And then, without warning, the first volley of laser fire lit up the darkness of space. The battle had begun. The first shots from the enemy fleet were devastating. Huge bursts of energy blasted through the vacuum of space, impacting the human ships with terrifying force. Several smaller ships in the outer ranks of the fleet were instantly destroyed, their hulls ripped apart by the relentless firepower of the invaders. The human fleet responded immediately, opening fire with every weapon at their disposal. Plasma cannons roared to life, firing in quick succession, while EMP missiles shot forward, detonating in flashes of light that sent shockwaves through the enemy's ranks. But the enemy was ready. They were prepared for this. They had studied humanity's tactics, and their counterattack was swift. Human warships exploded in the blink of an eye as alien ships maneuvered effortlessly, evading most of the incoming fire. Admiral Cross watched the chaos unfold, his mind racing. He knew they couldn't rely solely on firepower. They had to outsmart the enemy. All units switched to evasive tactics. Break formation and spread out. Focus on their weak points. Don't give them a chance to regroup, he commanded. Across the fleet, the human ships obeyed, scattering into smaller groups to avoid the concentrated fire of the enemy. The battle became a chaotic dance of destruction as both sides clashed in the emptiness of space. Laser blasts, missile explosions, and the sounds of war filled the void. The Vanguard and its fellow ships fought fiercely, their crews working together like well-oiled machines, pushing back against the relentless tide of the enemy forces. Admiral Cross's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the battle unfold. They were holding their ground, but just barely. The enemy fleet was enormous, and it was clear they weren't going to stop until humanity was destroyed. But something inside Cross stirred, an unshakable belief that humanity wasn't done yet. They had faced the unknown before. They had stood against impossible odds and survived. And now, they would do it again. "We're not giving up," he whispered to himself, gripping the armrest of his command chair. "We will fight, and we will win." The fate of humanity hung in the balance. The battle was far from over, but Earth's forces had just made their stand. And the universe would know that humanity was no longer a prey. They were a force to be reckoned with. The battle raged on as the void of space became a chaotic battlefield. Explosions lit up the darkness, casting brief flashes of light that painted the wreckage of warships in brilliant colors. Humanity's fleet had held its ground for hours, but the relentless assault from the alien forces was taking its toll. The enemy's ships, though smaller in number, were far more maneuverable and deadly. With every second that passed, it felt like the human fleet was on the verge of being overwhelmed. Admiral Cross stood at the helm of the Vanguard, sweat beading on his forehead as he watched his ship take another hit. The massive warship shuddered, alarms blaring as the shields flickered dangerously. His knuckles widened as he gripped the command chair tighter. "We're taking too many hits," said Commander Jacobson, his voice strained as he observed the damage reports on his screen. "We need backup. The enemy's overwhelming us." Cross nodded, his eyes narrowing as he stared out into the battlefield. There was no denying it. Humanity's fleet was being outgunned. But giving up was not an option. Not yet. "Deploy the reserve fleet. Call for reinforcements from Earth," he ordered, his voice sharp and commanding. "We hold this position, or we die trying." As the call for reinforcements went out, Earth's military quickly scrambled to get additional warships ready to deploy. But that was only part of the equation. The real question was, could humanity last long enough for those reinforcements to arrive? Meanwhile, in the heart of the enemy fleet, the alien commander, an imposing figure known only as Vrax, watched the battle unfold with cold detachment. Vrax had led countless invasions across the galaxy, and humanity's resistance was an inconvenience. Their warships were impressive, but ultimately, they were still just a primitive species, one that would be easily crushed once their forces were stretched thin. "The resistance is stronger than anticipated," Vrax muttered, his voice low and guttural. "But no matter. Their fate is sealed. The fleet will fall." Vrax's command ship, the Oblivion, fired another barrage of energy beams into the heart of the human fleet, annihilating several smaller ships in the process. His forces were relentless, their tactics precise, each strike designed to weaken the human will to fight. The invaders had already decimated one colony. They would not stop until Earth was in ruins as well. Back on the Vanguard, Admiral Cross's eyes locked onto the massive Oblivion, the flagship of the alien fleet. It was the heart of their operation, and if it fell, the enemy would lose their coordination, their command structure, and their edge. A strike to the Oblivion would cripple them. "Captain," Cross said, his voice filled with resolve, "prepare the Vanguard for a direct assault on the Oblivion. We're going after their command ship." "But, sir, the enemy's forces are too numerous," Captain Milner of the Vanguard warned, her face pale as she analyzed the enemy fleet. "We'll be surrounded before we even get close." Admiral Cross took a deep breath, his mind already racing through the calculations. They were in a tight spot, but this was their best chance. A targeted strike at the Oblivion could turn the tide in their favor. "We have no choice," Cross said. "The reinforcements will be too late. We go in, we hit hard, and we take them down." The crew on the Vanguard nodded in unison, the tension thick in the air. They knew the risks. A direct assault on the enemy's flagship was a suicide mission, but it was the only shot they had left. With a quick command, the fleet began to break formation, each warship diverging into small, agile groups to prepare for the deadly approach. Admiral Cross gripped the armrest of his chair, his heart pounding in his chest. This is it. This is our moment. The Vanguard powered up its engines, cutting through the darkness of space as it barreled toward the Oblivion. The rest of the fleet followed in formation, creating a wall of defense behind their flagship. As the distance closed, the first waves of enemy fire erupted. Alien ships locked onto the Vanguard, sending streams of destructive energy toward the human warship. Explosions rocked the ship, but the crew held steady, returning fire with everything they had. The Vanguard's cannons erupted, sending precise blasts into the heart of the enemy forces. The Oblivion loomed large ahead, its dark hull seemingly impenetrable. But Cross wasn't intimidated. He knew that if they could breach its defenses, the alien command ship would fall. The final stretch to the Oblivion was the most intense. Explosions filled the air, debris scattered across space, and smaller enemy ships formed around them. The Vanguard was taking damage with every second. Its hull dented and burned, but it pushed forward. The crew, led by Cross, fought with everything they had, refusing to back down. Suddenly, the vanguard broke through the enemy lines, coming within striking distance of the Oblivion. The enemy flagship's shields flickered, vulnerable for just a moment. Cross gave the order. "Now fire everything we've got." The massive weapons of the vanguard fired in a coordinated barrage, piercing the weakening shields of the Oblivion. The enemy flagship shook as explosions rocked its core. The energy blasts tore through the hull, ripping apart vital systems. The Oblivion's commander scrambled, but it was too late. On board the Oblivion, Vrax watched in disbelief as his flagship began to crumble. The once imposing vessel was falling apart under the assault of the human fleet. His hands trembled in rage, but he knew it was over. "Retreat," he bellowed. "Pull back. All ships, retreat." The order came too late. The Oblivion began to lose power, its internal systems failing. With one final explosion, the flagship of the invaders was reduced to a fiery wreck. Humanity's fleet erupted in victory as the remaining alien ships scrambled to retreat, their formation broken and their morale shattered. The battle was won. Admiral Cross stood in silence, staring at the wreckage of the Oblivion on the screen before him. The enemy fleet was in disarray, their once imposing force now nothing more than a scattering of ships trying to escape. Humanity had struck back with a vengeance, and they had won. "We did it," Captain Milner whispered, her voice filled with awe. The crew of the Vanguard cheered, a sense of relief washing over them. They had faced impossible odds, but they had triumphed. Admiral Cross allowed himself a brief, weary smile. They had fought for their survival, and they had proven to the universe that humanity would never bow down. "Let's finish this," he said. "But this time, we do it for good." And as the remnants of the alien fleet retreated, the human forces pursued, determined to wipe out every last trace of the invaders. Earth was safe, for now. But this battle was only the beginning. The galaxy had seen humanity's power, and it would never forget. And neither would the enemies who dared to challenge them.